You're sitting in your driveway right now, staring at a car that costs you more every single month, and you're convinced there's no way around it. You think keeping a vehicle running means handing your money to mechanics, dealerships, and parts stores forever. But I found people who barely touch that system at all. People who make a car last twice as long, for a fraction of the cost, using tricks nobody sells you. They're Amish. And no, they don't all reject engines the way you think. I spent 2 winters near Holmes County, Ohio, watching Amish families who hire drivers, run their own shop vehicles, and keep old machines alive decades past what any dealership would call the end. What I saw made me feel like a fool for every dollar I ever wasted. By the end of this, I'll show you a rust trick written down in a 1940s farm ledger that a mechanic told me flat out was impossible. And every single thing I found you can do this week in your own garage with what you already own. I'll be honest with you. I didn't believe any of it at first. I went in as a skeptic. I'm a man in my late 50s, and for 30 years I did everything the expensive way. New car every 5 years. Every warning light meant a $400 visit. I thought that was just the cost of living. So when a friend told me the Amish keep vehicles running longer and cheaper than anyone he'd ever met, I laughed at him. I figured it was a myth, the kind of thing people say to sound folksy. Then I met a man named Eli. Eli ran a small buggy and equipment repair shop off a gravel road, and he also serviced the cars of the English drivers his community hired. The first thing that stopped me cold was his own vehicle. A plain white work van, nothing fancy, and he told me it had just crossed 310,000 miles. Original engine. He said it like it was nothing. When I asked what his secret was, he wiped his hands on a rag and said one thing that stuck with me. He said, "The machine doesn't wear out. People stop paying attention, and then they pay somebody else to notice." That sentence bothered me for weeks, because I knew he was talking about me. So I started asking questions, and the first answer I got contradicted everything the modern car world had ever told me. Eli told me the single biggest thing that kills a vehicle isn't miles. It's short trips and neglected fluid. He said most English folks drive their car 12 minutes to the store, shut it off, and never let the engine fully warm. Moisture builds inside the oil and the exhaust. It never burns off. And that moisture, he said, is what quietly rots an engine from the inside long before the outside ever shows it. Now here's where I got skeptical again, because that sounded too simple, so I dug. And I found that the University of Nebraska's Agricultural Extension had studied exactly this in farm equipment decades ago. Engines run on frequent short cycles, never reaching full operating temperature, accumulate water and fuel dilution in the oil that can cut engine life by a significant margin. The old farmers knew it. The Amish never forgot it. So what does Eli actually do? He follows a rule he called warming and working. Once or twice a week, that van gets driven at highway speed for at least 20 minutes, on purpose, to boil out every bit of moisture and let the oil do its job. He changes his oil not by the sticker on the windshield, but by how the oil looks and smells on the dipstick. He told me a clean engine gives you clean oil, and dark, gritty oil that smells like fuel is the engine crying for help. I started doing this with my own car. Just that one habit. And I noticed the engine ran smoother within a month. But that raised a bigger question in my mind. If something that simple could add years to an engine, why had no mechanic ever told me? Why does every service I've ever paid for push me toward more parts, not fewer? The other half was where the rust actually starts, and it wasn't where I thought. It was about rust. Eli took me around the back of his shop to a lean-to where an old pickup sat, and he pointed at the undercarriage. Where my trucks always rotted out, this one was clean. Solid metal. He asked me how old I thought it was. I guessed maybe 10 years. He said 26. I didn't believe him until he showed me the title. Here's what he told me. In his world, rust is the real enemy, not the engine. An engine you can rebuild. A rusted-out frame is a dead vehicle. And the modern car world, he said, has almost no interest in stopping rust because rust is exactly what forces you to buy the next car. Now, the Amish live in salt country. Ohio, Pennsylvania, Indiana. Winter roads get salted heavy, and salt is what eats a frame alive, so they develop something. Eli mixed his own undercoating in a bucket, and when he told me what was in it, I almost walked out, thinking he was pulling my leg. Used motor oil thinned with a little diesel and a touch of lanolin, which is the grease from sheep's wool. I thought it was nonsense, so I went looking, and I found that lanolin as a rust preventive isn't folklore at all. It's documented. The material shows up in old corrosion literature going back to the early 1900s because it's naturally water repelling and it creeps into seams and clings to metal. The British Navy used lanolin-based coatings to protect equipment from sea salt. The Amish, without ever reading a naval manual, arrived at the exact same answer because they were solving the exact same problem with what they had on the farm. Here's how Eli did it. Every fall, before the first salt hit the roads, he'd get the vehicle up on ramps, take a cheap pump sprayer or even a brush, and coat the entire underside. The frame, the seams, the inside of the rocker panels through the drain holes. The oil-lanolin mix stays soft. It never fully hardens like the spray can stuff you buy, which cracks and traps water underneath where you can't see it. That cracking, he told me, is why store-bought undercoating often makes rust worse, not better. Water gets under the shell and sits, and that was the moment I got angry. Because I had paid a dealership $200 for undercoating on a truck once, and that truck rusted through the rocker panels in 6 years anyway. I'd been sold the very thing that failed, while the answer sat in a bucket behind a barn for the price of used oil I usually threw away. He pointed to the doors. He told me that most vehicles don't rust from the outside in. They rust from the inside out, starting in the doors and the bottoms of the panels, because water runs down the inside of the door skin and pools at the bottom. There are little drain holes down there, and those holes clog with dirt and leaves. Once they clog, water sits inside your door in the dark, and it eats the metal from a place you'll never look until it's too late. His fix cost nothing. Once a season, he'd run a thin wire or a pipe cleaner up into those drain holes along the bottom edge of every door and every rocker panel to clear them out, 2 minutes per door. He said that one habit alone had saved more vehicles in his community than any product ever sold. And when I checked my own car that night with a flashlight, 3 of my 4 door drains were completely plugged with muck. Water was sitting inside my doors right then, rotting them, and I never had a clue. So now I had 2 secrets that cost almost nothing, and I started to wonder just how deep this went, because if the car world had hidden rust prevention for me, what else was I overpaying for every month? The next answer hit my wallet the hardest. It was about the battery. Eli told me that most people throw away batteries that aren't dead. They're just neglected. He said in his community, a battery was expected to last far longer than the 3 or 4 years most English folks get, and the reason came down to 2 things almost nobody does anymore. The first was terminal corrosion, that white and blue fuzz that builds on the battery posts. He said that fuzz is like a clogged artery. It chokes the flow, makes your alternator work overtime, and slowly kills both the battery and the charging system. His fix was a spoonful of baking soda in a cup of water, poured over the terminals to neutralize the acid, then a wire brush, then, and this is the part people skip, a smear of plain grease or petroleum jelly on the clean post to keep air and moisture from starting the corrosion all over again. But the second thing he told me is what actually stunned me. He said a battery that sits in a cold vehicle, used only for short trips, never gets fully charged. It lives its whole life at partial charge, and a battery kept partially charged in the cold builds up something called sulfation on its internal plates. That's what actually kills most batteries. Not age, starvation. I looked this up, and sure enough, battery research from multiple engineering sources confirms it. Sulfation from chronic undercharging is one of the leading causes of premature battery death, and it happens fastest in exactly the driving pattern most of us have. Short trips, cold starts, lots of accessories. That question is what pulled me through the next door, because the answer wasn't about engines at all. And honestly, that question stayed with me so long and so hard that it became the spine of everything I eventually wrote down. If you want to go deeper than what fits in a single video, I put the full picture into a book called Plain Wisdom. Everything from Eli's ledger, to the mixtures, to the habits, laid out step by step the way a man in his shop would explain it to you. It's called Plain Wisdom, and you can find it in the description below. It's the kind of thing you read once and keep on the shelf next to your socket wrench. But Eli wasn't finished. He said the coating was only half of it. Eli's solution was a simple maintenance charger, the small kind that trickles a battery to full and holds it there. He had one wired in his shop and rotated it through the community's vehicles in winter. He said a battery that's kept full and clean can easily double its life. And when I did the math on my own household, 2 vehicles, replacing batteries every 3 years at $140 a pop, I realized I'd probably thrown away more than $1,000 over the years on batteries that were never actually worn out. They were just neglected. That's when the pattern became impossible to ignore. Everything Eli showed me had the same shape, a simple habit nearly free, that the modern system had quietly buried because a maintained thing doesn't generate sales. And I want to stop right here, because I know exactly what some of you are thinking. You're thinking this all sounds fine for a man with a barn, a set of ramps, and a shop full of tools. You're thinking, I live in a suburb, I've got a 2-car garage or maybe just a driveway, I'm not crawling under a vehicle, and I don't know a socket wrench from a screwdriver. This part is for you, I mean that. Stay with me, because the next things I found need nothing but your 2 hands and 10 minutes, and they'll save you more than anything so far. Let me give you the ones that changed my ordinary daily driving, right now, in a normal life. The first is tire pressure, but not the way you've heard it. Eli laughed when I told him I checked my tires when the light came on. He said by the time that light comes on, you've already been driving underinflated for weeks, burning extra fuel and wearing the outside edges off your tires. He checks pressure with a $2 pencil gauge on the first cold morning of every month, because pressure drops as the weather cools. He told me that keeping tires at the right pressure is the single easiest way to add thousands of miles to their life and cut your fuel bill at the same time. The Department of Energy backs this exactly. Properly inflated tires can improve your gas mileage by around 3% and dramatically extend tread life. That's free money you're leaving on the road every day. The second is something I never would have guessed. Eli told me to stop letting my gas tank run near empty, and not for the reason you think. He said the fuel in your tank actually helps cool and lubricate your fuel pump, and running low constantly, especially in a hot vehicle, makes that pump run hot and die early. A fuel pump replacement can cost $600 or more. His rule was simple: never let it drop below a quarter tank. That habit alone quietly protects one of the most expensive small parts in your whole car, and it costs you nothing but the discipline to fill up sooner. The third one you can do standing in your driveway with a rag. Eli showed me how the rubber seals around the doors and trunk, the weather stripping, dry out and crack over the years, and once they crack, water and cold air get in, and replacing them costs a fortune. His fix was to wipe them down a couple times a year with a thin coat of silicone or even a little plain petroleum jelly to keep the rubber soft and sealed. He said the same for the door hinges and latches. A single drop of oil keeps them from wearing and squeaking. Tiny things. But he said the difference between a vehicle that feels old and one that feels solid at 200,000 miles is nothing but 100 tiny things nobody bothered to do. And here's the one that made me feel the most foolish, because it's so obvious once you hear it. Eli told me the fastest way people destroy their brakes and transmission is how they drive the last 100 feet, riding the brakes down every hill, slamming to a stop at every light, shifting or reversing before the car has fully stopped. He drives like the machine is going to outlive him, because in his world it has to. Gentle stops, coasting to red lights instead of racing to them, letting the vehicle come to a complete rest before shifting. He said driving gentle is a free repair you perform every single time you turn the key. And I felt that one, because I'd been hard on every car I ever owned and blamed the cars. So none of this needs a barn. It needs attention. That's the whole secret, and it's the thing they can't sell you. But now I have to tell you about the door Eli almost didn't open. Because when I pushed him on where all this knowledge came from, he got quiet, and then he walked me over to a shelf in the back of his shop. On that shelf was a ledger, a real one, cloth-bound, the pages soft and brown at the edges. He told me it had belonged to his grandfather, and it went back to the 1940s. It was full of notes in careful pencil handwriting, in a mix of English and the German dialect they speak, repair records, mixtures, little diagrams. This was the buried research I'd been circling the whole time, sitting on a shelf behind a barn in Ohio, written by a man who'd been dead for decades. And in that ledger was the rust trick a modern mechanic had told me, to my face, was impossible. Here's what it said, and here's what makes it genius. We talked about coating the outside of the frame, but the deadliest rust, the kind that condemns a vehicle, grows inside the hollow frame rails and inside the rocker panels, in the sealed cavities where no brush and no spray can ever reach. The mechanic I'd asked said once rust starts inside a boxed frame, the vehicle is finished because you cannot get to it. The ledger said otherwise. Eli's grandfather had figured out that you don't need to reach the rust. You need to reach the air around it. He would warm his oil and lanolin mixture until it was thin as water, almost a fog, and using a long, flexible tube pushed through the existing factory drain holes and access holes in the frame, he would flood the inside of those hollow cavities. The thin, warm oil would creep along every inner surface, coat the bare metal in the dark where rust begins, and then thicken as it cooled, leaving a film that water simply cannot cling to. He was protecting the one place the entire car industry had written off as a lost cause. And the science is real. This is exactly the principle behind the expensive cavity wax treatments that high-end rust shops now charge hundreds of dollars for. A creeping oil film that displaces moisture inside sealed metal cavities. The Amish were doing it in the 1940s with sheep grease, used motor oil, and a length of tubing for pennies. Somebody figured it out. The world forgot it, or buried it, because a frame that never rots is a car you never have to replace. And a family in Ohio quietly kept it alive in pencil on a shelf, until a skeptic like me came asking. I stood in that shop holding a 70-year-old notebook, and I finally understood what Eli meant that first day. The machine doesn't wear out. We just stop paying attention, and then we pay somebody else to notice. Every single thing I'd been sold as impossible or complicated was, at its root, simple attention applied early by someone who expected the thing they owned to last a lifetime. You can do this. The warm oil frame treatment, done once every couple of years in the fall, on ramps in your own driveway, will outlast anything a dealership ever sold you. And even if you never crawl under a car in your life, clearing those door drains and keeping your battery full and your tires right will save you more money than most people save in a year of clipping coupons. Here's what I want you to feel, walking away from this. You were never bad with cars. You were never helpless. You were just kept in the dark on purpose, made to feel that a machine is a mystery only an expert can touch, so that you'd keep paying and keep replacing. That's the thing that was taken from you. Not money, confidence in your own two hands. You're the kind of person who already suspected this, who looked at a $400 repair bill and felt in your gut that it shouldn't be this way. It never should have been. And now you've got the same knowledge a family in Holmes County kept alive in pencil for 3 generations. So here's what I want to know from you, and I'm asking you straight, because folks watching this rarely leave a word unless I ask. When you went out and checked your door drains with a flashlight, how many of the 4 were clogged? I'm genuinely curious whether yours were as bad as mine. Leave that number in the comments, just the number, and tell me where you're watching from while you're at it. I read them. And if something in you woke up today, if you feel like you just got back a piece of common sense the modern world tried to sell back to you at a markup, then come stand with the rest of us who are digging this knowledge out of the ground before it's gone for good. Subscribe, because this is a movement of people who trust their own hands over expensive noise, and I'm not stopping. Next time, I'm opening that same ledger to a page I haven't shown anyone yet. A homemade fuel treatment his grandfather ran in every engine, from tractors to trucks, using one common thing off the pantry shelf that he swore kept the fuel system clean for decades. I tested it. What happened surprised even me. I'll see you there. I'll be honest, I couldn't show you everything here. Inside the plain living circle, I picked this exact video right back up where it stopped, laying it all out plain. And you can ask me your own question, and a real person, me, answers you myself. You won't be alone. Folks like you are already inside. Just point your phone's camera at the code on the screen, and you can cancel any time. No risk at all.